Clustered about the water well, Rocktown consisted of 6 houses by the road. Jonathan couldn't recall if he'd been there before. It looked familiar, but then most of the houses thereabouts looked very much the same. He puzzled over the name Rocktown. He saw no rocks. He wondered if there was a nearby quarry. He thought his father had gone there a few months ago. He tried to remember why, but couldn't. It annoyed him that he couldn't. The men stopped at the well, where a woman was drawing water. She didn't pause in her work, nor did she speak, but the band of men clearly made her uneasy. Jonathan watched her with curiosity, trying to guess her thoughts. How could she just be doing nothing when so much was about to happen? "Let's be quick about it," the corporal called. He had, as before, remained seated on his horse. The woman grew agitated under the scrutiny of the men. "Here," she finally said, as she drew the water-filled bucket up. "You can have it." It was the Frenchman who, stepping forward, touched his forehead and said, "Merci." Grabbing the bucket in his hands, he drank deeply. Then he passed the bucket to the next. Most of the men drank. Not one offered anything to Jonathan. He was too shy to ask. The woman watched the bucket go around. "Where are you heading?" she asked. Jonathan was surprised by her question. He had thought that everyone would know the fighting was to come. "Enemy troops are headed this way," the corporal said. "Here?" exclaimed the woman. Her face had turned pale. "If we don't stop them—" It took a moment for the woman to absorb the news. "From which way?" she asked. Her voice was small, one hand at her throat. "Up from Pennington." With a suddenness that took them all by surprise, the woman gathered up her skirts, turned, and fled. It made the men laugh. Jonathan wasn't sure why it seemed funny, but it did. Only the corporal hadn't laughed. "It's time to go," he said. The laughter had eased the men. It was as if seeing the woman frightened made them feel better. "I won't be scared the way she was," Jonathan thought. As they got ready to move again, they kept watching the house into which the woman had fled. Sure enough, she reappeared in a few moments with 2 young children and an old man. Hurriedly, they began swinging the wooden shutters over their windows. Then they rushed back inside. The door slammed loudly. The house looked dead. The men laughed again. Without any warning, one of them raised his gun and fired into the air. Everyone jumped. The corporal whirled, his face a crimson red. The man who had shot the gun was grinning broadly. "Damn you," the corporal cried. "Want them to know we're here?" The grinning man looked about. He saw that others were also angry. "Just a joke," he said, his grin fading. "Fool," the corporal barked. "So stop here in your books and make a note on a sticky." This is another element of foreshadowing. Remember that foreshadowing is a hint that the author gives you that things aren't going to go the way planned in battle. So this is just another example. The woman fleeing into the house, the man firing the gun into the air, and everybody getting upset that that's not the right thing to do. These are also signs that are telling you that things aren't going to go well. Okay, let's go ahead and continue. We're on page 31. "Now, damn all, hurry," said the corporal. "We're late as it is." He kicked at his horse. Suddenly all the laughter gone. The men went too. For a moment Jonathan remained behind, upset. He turned to look at the Rocktown homes. From some of them people emerged. They stood watching as the band moved off. Jonathan began to find his pride again. They were, he reminded himself, looking at him, for he too was a soldier. Then, realizing he was left behind, he bolted down the road. Half a mile south of Rocktown, the road reached its highest point. The men moved slowly, almost reluctantly, to its crest. The corporal, impatient as ever, kept the lead. At the top, he jumped to the ground. They had arrived. Some of the men sat down, some lay on their backs. Jonathan noticed a number had brought flasks and were taking drinks. He wished he had taken some water at the Rocktown well. He was thirsty now. A few of the men went to where the corporal stood. Side by side they studied the road which sloped gradually down toward the south. It was a wide valley through which the road passed as if the road itself had once been a river that now ran dry. Trees to either side rose up like palisades. Because the road turned, it wasn't possible to see very far, no more than a quarter mile. Jonathan looked back over his shoulder. The clouds had rolled up higher. They were thunder clouds of deep gray blue, rising columns of layered darkness. If it rained, he knew it would come hard, making it difficult for them to fire their guns. This is another element of foreshadowing. This is another hint that things aren't going to go well. You can talk about the picture the author paints here with the clouds and how that will affect the gun. You can make the note of that on the sticky. The men, including the corporal, paid no mind to the clouds. Instead, they continued looking down the road that went well beyond the hill. "We'll wait for them here," the corporal said. "They'll have to come up," agreed one man. "Rising men shoot high," he added. They all considered that. "Thought you said we'd ambush them." It was the man Jonathan had tried to talk to, his father's friend. His face was pale, tense. "We could. Sure we could," agreed another quickly. "It'd be better. It would." The corporal shook his head. "No place to hide behind," he replied. "Too wide. No walls. No fences. Nothing." "Trees?" suggested someone. "We have any rifles here?" the corporal asked. Looking about. "No, just smooth bore. We'd be too far away." He turned about and acknowledged the storm clouds. "And if a wind comes up, it'll blow our shot to nothing." "We'll line up here," he said firmly. This is another element of foreshadowing. I put a sticky that turns out they can't ambush them like they planned and explain why based upon the terrain. We're again on page 34. Jonathan's father's friend objected, shaking his head violently. "No," he said, "I don't care for it." He glanced about, seeking support from others. "We drill, we do, regular, but not against such as these." He made a nod of his head as if to suggest what was coming up the road. His words brought a nervous quiet. Then someone said, "I'm willing to stand here. I can't see any other way." It was the man who had shot off his gun at Rocktown. The corporal took off his hat and pushed back his hair. "All agreed?" he asked. No one replied. "How much longer do you think they'll be?" someone asked. "Soon enough." "Where's your Snydertown folks, Corporal? That's what I'd like to know," someone called from the side of the road. The corporal kept his eyes down the road. "They better come," said another. "You and them, you all started this." The corporal's mouth pinched tighter. It was then that Jonathan first heard the distant tapping of the drum, and the others caught the sound. They lifted their heads. Suddenly, monotonously, the tapping came. To it was added the high, piercing squeal of a fife. It slit through the air like the cutting edge of a blade. Slowly, the man on the ground stood up. "They be coming," someone said. Okay, so let's stop there. If you need to re-listen to this, I basically started from 1:30 to 2:30 and read through that section. Go ahead and pause at places if you need to and re-listen, reread, make notes for your essay where you're coming up with at least 3 instances of foreshadowing. Okay? The rest of that essay pre-plan, I want you to complete yourself. And if you do finish it, you can go on to drafting your essay. Thanks, guys.